Elizabeth was a bright and cheerful girl who lived in a small town in Austria. She loved reading books filled with adventures, magical lands, and faraway places. Every night, she would dream about traveling to big cities, exploring mountains, and meeting new friends. One sunny afternoon, Elizabeth sat with her father, Jason, in their cozy living room. She looked up at him with sparkling eyes and said, "Daddy, when I grow up, I want to go to Paris. I want to see the Eiffel Tower and the beautiful parks." Jason frowned and shook his head. "No, Elizabeth. A girl should stay home and help her family. You cannot travel." "But Daddy," Elizabeth pleaded, "I just want to see the world. I promise I'll be careful." Jason's face turned serious. "You will stay here, and that is final." Elizabeth felt sad, but she didn't want to upset her father. She nodded quietly, but deep inside, her dreams were still alive. As the years passed, Elizabeth grew into a young woman. Her dreams of adventure never faded. One day, when she was 18, she gathered her courage and approached her father again. "Daddy, please let me go to Paris," she said, her heart racing. "I want to see the museums and the parks. It's my dream." Jason's face turned red with anger. "I told you no. You think you can just leave? You will stay here with me." "Elizabeth, I need your help with something," he said, his voice calm but with an edge she didn't quite understand. Elizabeth followed him down the stairs, into the dimly lit basement. But instead of finding a normal basement, she saw a heavy door she had never noticed before. "Go inside and see if everything is in order," Jason instructed, opening the door to a small room. Elizabeth stepped inside, curious but nervous. The room was cold and dark, with thick walls and no windows. Suddenly, she heard the door slam shut behind her. "Papa! What are you doing?" she cried, rushing back to the door, but it was locked. From the other side, Jason's voice was cold. "You'll stay here until you learn to be obedient," he said, and then he was gone. Elizabeth was trapped. She banged on the door, called out for help, but no one came. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and soon years passed by. Elizabeth felt her heart break. She was trapped in a dark, cold room with no windows. She cried and shouted, but no one could hear her. Elizabeth's mother and her sister looked for her for many years. They gave up the search after assuming she had ran away. While in the basement, Elizabeth had children for her father. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into years. Elizabeth was all alone in the basement. She missed the sunlight, the fresh air, and her dreams of traveling. One day, after many years, she heard a soft voice. It was a little boy. "Mommy, I'm hungry," the boy said. Elizabeth looked down and saw her son, Jack, who was only a few years old. "Oh, sweetie, I'm sorry. I'll find you some food," Elizabeth said, trying to smile. As time went on, Elizabeth had 7 children in total. She loved them very much and tried to keep them happy, even in the dark basement. They played games and told stories to each other to forget their troubles. "Mommy, why can't we go outside?" Jack asked one day. Elizabeth sighed. "I wish we could, my love. But we have to stay safe down here." "Will we ever see the sun?" another child asked. "I hope so," Elizabeth replied, trying to be brave. "One day, we will." One day, Jack got very sick. Elizabeth was scared. "Please, Daddy, let us go to the hospital," she begged Jason when he came to visit. Jason hesitated, but he didn't want to risk the child getting worse. "Fine, but only for a little while," he said angrily. He took Jack to the hospital, but he didn't know that this would change everything. At the hospital, the doctors were surprised to see Jack. They noticed he looked very pale and weak. "Who is this child?" one doctor asked. "I don't know," Jason said, looking nervous. "He's just my son." The doctors felt something was wrong and decided to ask questions. They even called the police to help find out who Jack was. Meanwhile, back at home, Jason's wife Rose started to worry. She had always thought Elizabeth had run away. But now, she began to suspect that something terrible was happening. "I need to know the truth," Rose told herself. She called the police and said, "I think my husband is hiding something." The police arrived at the Jason home and searched the house. They found the hidden door to the basement. With a loud bang, they opened it and called out, "Is anyone down there?" Elizabeth heard the voices and rushed to the door. "Help! We're down here," she shouted, her heart racing with hope. The police quickly came down the stairs and saw Elizabeth and her children. "You're safe now," one officer said, smiling. "We are here to help you." Elizabeth couldn't believe it. After 24 years of darkness, she was finally free. She hugged her children tightly, tears of joy streaming down her face. Jason was arrested and was sent to prison. Elizabeth and her children were given new homes where they could be safe and happy. Elizabeth was reunited with her mom and sister. She was grateful to be free. She looked at her children and said, "We can finally start a new life. We can go outside and see the sun." "Will we go to Paris?" Jack asked, his eyes shining with excitement. "Yes, my dear. We will travel and see all the beautiful places I always dreamed of," Elizabeth replied, her heart full of hope. As they stepped outside into the warm sunlight for the first time, Elizabeth felt a sense of freedom she had longed for. She promised herself that she would live life to the fullest, not just for herself but for her children too. Elizabeth's story showed how strong and brave she was, even after going through such a terrible time. She had finally escaped the darkness and was ready to embrace the light of the world.